Metaforando nunca responde quem fala que ele faz pseudociência. Como não? Eu já fiz pelo menos 10 vídeos respondendo exatamente essa galera. Mas calma aí, hoje vai ter uma resposta diferente. Acompanha. Fala aí pessoal, beleza? Meu nome é Vitor Santos, eu sou especialista em linguagem corporal, investigador profissional e perito técnico das microexpressões faciais. E você está no canal Metaforando, o maior canal de linguagem corporal do mundo. Sim, hoje nós vamos aqui de assuntos polêmicos, mamilos. Vamos falar então sobre microexpressões faciais, mais precisamente a teoria da universalidade das emoções e algumas críticas que têm surgido e até mesmo dúvidas sobre a teoria da universalidade das emoções. Especificamente, se a teoria da universalidade das emoções e tudo que tem nela, microexpressões faciais, respostas emocionais instintivas, inatas, etc e tal, se tudo isso na verdade não passa de conversa, se não fui eu que inventei, o Metaforando inventou tudo isso, ou se existem evidências científicas e quais são essas evidências científicas que suportam a teoria da universalidade das emoções. Já adianto para você que está vendo esse vídeo que esse é um vídeo técnico, não é um vídeo para ficar atacando ódio em ninguém, para ficar tentando manchar a reputação de ninguém, nem nada do gênero, que é o que tentam fazer comigo muitas vezes, mas esse é um vídeo para falar sobre fatos, sobre evidências e sobre ciência. Portanto, se você é fanboy meu e quer vir aqui me elogiar, ou é fanboy de uma outra pessoa e quer vir aqui me atacar, deixa seu comentário aqui e sai do vídeo agora. Vai, xinga ou elogia e vaza do vídeo. Agora, se você está interessado no debate, existem evidências sobre o comportamento emocional inato, microexpressões? Existem? Sim? Não? Quais são as evidências? Quais são as principais críticas? Se você realmente quer ser alguém que sabe o que está acontecendo, qual é a conversa no campo acadêmico, no campo científico, sobre a teoria da universalidade das emoções e microexpressões faciais, etc. Se você quer se informar, assista esse vídeo até o final. Não precisa confiar na minha palavra, tá? Veja o vídeo e tire suas próprias conclusões, beleza? Bom, da onde veio a ideia de fazer esse vídeo? Acontece que nos últimos dias eu tenho recebido várias perguntas no seguinte sentido: será que o Metaforando é pseudociência? Ou seja, será que a linha de teoria que eu apresento aqui no canal, que é a linha teórica da universalidade das emoções, é uma teoria pseudocientífica? É uma teoria que não possui evidência, né? Nenhuma evidência científica? E um outro comentário que eu recebi muito foi esse aqui: o Metaforando nunca respondeu quem criticou ele dizendo que ele fazia pseudociência. Vamos começar respondendo isso aqui. Como assim eu nunca respondi? Eu já respondi inúmeras vezes. As principais críticas que foram feitas ao modelo da universalidade das emoções, que é o modelo que eu partilho, partindo desse modelo eu crio todos os conteúdos que eu apresento aqui no Metaforando, eu já respondi as principais críticas a esse modelo em diversos conteúdos diferentes. Já fiz um vídeo de quase 3 horas de duração no Metadata Podcast. Já fiz vídeo entrevistando pessoas da área da justiça que falavam sobre o uso de microexpressões faciais e linguagem corporal como prova. Além da área jurídica, já falei também sobre a área criminal, também na área da justiça, eu já trouxe ali evidências sobre a utilização do comportamento não verbal como prova em casos criminais também. Já trouxe artigos e evidências de diversos autores que fazem justificativas da área biológica, por exemplo, quando microexpressões faciais emocionais são encontradas em cachorros e em outros primatas não humanos. Já dei também referências psicofisiológicas em vários vídeos falando sobre como funciona o processo de uma microexpressão facial emocional. Depois que uma emoção é processada no cérebro, também trazendo vários outros autores para falar sobre isso, mas claro que para esses criticozinhos de plantão que apenas ficam replicando a mesma ideia,
Metaforando fala os lero-lero dele para vender curso, não dá para confiar no que ele fala.
Claro que para essa galera eles nunca vão comentar essas outras respostas, eles vão focar numa mesma narrativa, porque isso não dá view. Por exemplo, você não vai ver nunca nenhum desses criticozinhos falando sobre a live feita com 3 grandes especialistas e acadêmicos associados à área das emoções humanas, que foi a live feita pelo Dr. Rui Mateus, pelo mestre em psicologia, Davi Leucas, e pelo especialista em segurança Anderson Tamborim, quando eles apresentaram as principais evidências sobre as microexpressões faciais. Você não vai ver nenhum críticozinho comentando isso porque não dá view, não dá like e não engaja tanto quanto colocar a minha cara com várias palavras negativas numa thumb. Só para finalizar sobre a conduta dessa galerinha que critica o Metaforando, que diz que está a favor da ciência e não a favor do hype, e não apenas ganhar views e likes utilizando meu nome, só para questionar a conduta deles eu levanto um fato que aconteceu que é no mínimo curioso. Em 2021, quando surgiram alguns ataques contra a teoria da universalidade das emoções, ocorreu um dos maiores seminários do comportamento não verbal E quem estava responsável por organizar e gerenciar esse seminário era o Davi Leucas, que além de ser mestre em psicologia e ser o criador de uma pós-graduação, é também o idealizador do projeto Clue Lab. Esse seminário contou com inúmeros acadêmicos de psicologia, antropologia, sociologia, biologia, e o foco era apenas falar sobre evidências do comportamento não verbal em diversas áreas, diversos âmbitos de aplicação. E na época foi feito um convite para que quem quisesse ir para o seminário, que poderia estar lá gratuitamente assistindo o seminário, para que fosse lá e fizesse perguntas, críticas ou até mesmo tentasse refutar ali, ao vivo, durante o seminário. Afinal de contas, ele era online. Imagina só, você é um crítico, né, um críticozinho do comportamento não verbal, e você tem plena certeza de que isso não funciona, que não tem evidência nenhuma. Que é uma coisa mais científica do que você ir para um congresso, para um seminário online, onde você vai ter a chance de falar com diversos psicólogos, sociólogos, pessoas da academia, né, da área da ciência, e você vai poder tecer várias críticas e falar que tudo que eles fazem não funciona, e vai poder ter um debate totalmente científico, porque ali todos são cientistas, né, não vai ter nenhum youtuber tipo eu lá, mas aí na prática o que aconteceu, como o próprio Clue Lab postou na época, numa publicação nas suas redes sociais, não apareceu nenhum críticozinho, nenhum pretenso refutador para deixar um comentário lá, para dizer, não funciona por causa disso, disso, daquilo. Os caras tinham a chance de falar com pesquisadores ali, cientistas, acadêmicos da psicologia, das áreas humanas, enfim, mas não apareceu nenhum lá para criticar, nem para debater, nem para nada. Sabe por quê? Porque isso não dá like, não dá tanta view, quanto colocar o meu nome e várias palavras negativas numa thumb. Mas pode ficar sossegado. Diferente dessa galera, eu não tô aqui para ficar fazendo espantalho, dizendo que na verdade eles estão apenas atrás de like, de view, e que eles não estão nem um pouco comprometidos com a ciência. Não, eu tenho boa fé, acredito que eles estejam sim interessados em divulgar a ciência e não interessados em aumentar o ego deles, ou até mesmo ganhar view e like de pessoa que não gosta do Metaforando. E é por ter essa boa fé que eu convido você que está vendo esse vídeo a mandar esse vídeo aqui para essa galera, para esses criticozinhos por aí. Principalmente para que eles respondam o desafio proposto por David Matsumoto, PhD em psicologia, um pesquisador com 40 anos de pesquisa na área dos afetos humanos, que nesse vídeo aqui que você está assistindo propõe um desafio. Fala sobre alguém trazer uma das principais evidências, caso algum dia seja traga. É uma evidência muito forte que pode até mesmo tirar ali bastante crédito e peso da teoria da universalidade das emoções. Então manda esse vídeo para os criticozinhos, fala para eles procurarem e trazerem essa evidência que o David Matsumoto vai falar nesse vídeo aqui. E por que eu tô falando tanto do David Matsumoto? Bom, basicamente eu vi vários comentários também nesse sentido aqui, ó. Não dá para confiar no Metaforando, ele só fala o lero-lero dele para vender curso. Pois bem, várias pessoas disseram a mesma coisa. O Metaforando não é psicólogo e nem cientista. Portanto, ele fica tentando criar uma imagem de autoridade, de perito, de blá blá blá. E sim, eu sou perito judicial, inclusive com inscrição de registro judicial sobre isso. Mas o argumento dessa galera é que não dá para confiar no que eu falo, porque eu vou trazer argumentos apenas para poder vender curso depois. O Metaforando ele vai ficar evitando responder as perguntas principais dos críticos. Ele vai só falar coisa para vender curso? Pois, muito bem. Vamos imaginar o cenário ideal, então. Imagina pegar as principais críticas feitas pela galerinha da internet e colocar elas para alguém da área da ciência, um psicólogo de fato, um PhD em psicologia, responder que não fosse eu, Metaforando, malvadão que quer vender curso pra galerinha. Esse seria o cenário ideal, correto? Pois é exatamente o que vai acontecer nesse vídeo. Eu peguei as principais críticas que foram feitas sobre o modelo da universalidade das emoções, aqui no YouTube, na internet brasileira, e compilei elas numa série de perguntas, as quais eu fiz para o Dr. David Matsumoto, que além de ser PhD em psicologia e professor emérito da Universidade de São Francisco, é também pesquisador ativo na área das emoções humanas, tendo trabalhado nos últimos 40 anos em pesquisas das emoções e dos afetos humanos, e também já esteve envolvido e já trabalhou em mais de 400 artigos científicos. É uma pessoa que tem um currículo muito mais científico que eu, e muito mais do que a galerinha da internet aí, pelo menos a vasta maioria deles aí também. E para alguém que esteja dizendo o seguinte, o Metaforando escolheu a dedo um PhD, um psicólogo ali, que concorda com ele para argumentar. Na verdade, não, tá muito mais pro contrário. Quem vem aqui pra internet, que se apresenta como sendo alguém da ciência, alguém que realmente está ativamente trabalhando como pesquisador, e não uma pessoa que é vlogueira ou tenta ser comediante, enfim, que é só falar o que não sabe, alguém que se apresenta como pesquisador na área dos afetos humanos e vem aqui pro YouTube brasileiro para criticar de maneira rasa a teoria da universalidade das emoções, essa pessoa está literalmente nadando contra a maré. A opinião dela literalmente representa a menor parte das pessoas que pesquisam ativamente, que trabalham, dia a dia das pessoas que trabalham com pesquisas na área das emoções e dos afetos humanos, conforme essa pesquisa que eu estou mostrando aqui para vocês. Essa pesquisa fez uma entrevista com mais de 250 cientistas que trabalhavam diretamente na área do afeto e das emoções humanas, e era um critério muito alto para você participar dessa pesquisa, ter tido seus artigos aprovados em revistas de peer review, né, pesquisa de revisão de pares, nos últimos 5 anos, você precisava ter trabalhado em mais de, sei lá, 5, 6 perguntas, também nos últimos 5 anos. Então eram apenas pessoas da área da ciência que estavam em atividade, que tinham pesquisas com uma qualificação bem alta e que pesquisavam diretamente na área dos afetos e das emoções humanas. E algumas perguntas foram feitas para esses cientistas que participaram dessa pesquisa. E mais de 80% deles concorda que existem sim fortes evidências a favor da universalidade das emoções, que é a mesma teoria que eu uso como base para tecer todos os comentários e fazer todos os vídeos aqui do canal Metaforando. Então não, o Matsumoto não é um cara que eu escolhi a dedo, pelo extremíssimo contrário. Ele é mais um dos inúmeros da vasta maioria de pesquisadores que trabalha ativamente pesquisando na área dos afetos e das emoções humanas. Ele não é youtuber, ele não é um cara que vai pro Twitter, não. Ele trabalha nisso há mais de 40 anos. Já trabalhou em mais de 400 artigos, pesquisas científicas e artigos, e além de tudo isso é PhD em Psicologia. Vamos ouvir aí o Matsumoto respondendo as principais críticas sobre as microexpressões faciais. Afinal de contas, Matsumoto, microexpressão facial é pseudociência? Quais as evidências de que ela não é uma pseudociência? Responde aí.
So, first of all, I would like to thank you, David, for being here with us today. It's a great honor to be able to speak with you. So, thank you very much. And as Tambourine said, you're a legend for us.
Well, it is my honor to always share time with friends and new friends wherever they are in the world. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Okay. So, I'd like to start asking you. Actually, I would like to ask you to present yourself to our audience. I mean, what's your professional relationship with nonverbal area? So that's my first ask.
Okay, well, I'm sorry for you and your audience because my answer may be very disappointing. But I had, 1,000 years ago, when I was younger, I had no idea or interest I would be doing what I do now, or in the field that I'm in and doing research as a psychology professor. Because if anybody knows me, if you actually saw me, you'd see I'm kind of a big guy for an Asian person, and I spend my life, I think you may know, I spend my life doing judo, and I've been to your beautiful country for judo many times. But anyway, when I was a undergraduate at the University of Michigan many years ago in the 1970s, somebody from and me being in psychology was an accident. So there's a story before this also. But when I was a psychology major, a professor came to me and said, "Oh, you're doing well in school. Would you like to be part of the honors program?" And I said, "Well, okay, please, thank you. I'd love to. What do I have to do?" And they said to me, "Well, you need to do a study." And I said, "Okay, great. What is that?" And the professor said, "Well, you find something you're interested in, and you make a hypothesis and you test it." I said, "Okay, great." And so he said to me, "What am I interested in?" And I genuinely had, and I still have, an interest in why young children who are pre-verbal understand their mothers and caretakers without knowing the words. And it's just an amazing thing to me. And so I told him that, and he said, "Oh, you need to go and talk to that guy over there." And I said, "Okay." So I went to talk to that guy over there who happened to be a very famous psychologist, but I had no idea. And I told him what I was interested in, and he said, "Okay, well, you need to do a study." And he helped me to create a study. And this was right at the end of my junior year. I was about to go to Japan for judo training. So he said, "Oh, when you're there, go and collect data on this idea." I said, "Okay," because everybody tells me what to do. I just say, "Okay," and I do it, So I went to Japan, and I'm there for judo, in the daytime, which is at night, is practice, right? So during the day, I had free time, and I made some contacts, and I collected data from kids in Japan to these, what I now know as nonverbal vocal cues. And I came back to the United States and had to finish my undergraduate degree. And so I did whatever I need to do to collect data from kids there as well. And that's what I knew. And because, you know, I'm the type of person, if I start something, I just keep doing it. Maybe because I'm boring, I don't know, but I just keep doing it. And I do it and do it. And so my advisor said, oh, when you go to grad school, because he knew I was coming here to UC Berkeley. And he said, when you go there, go and look up this guy. He's in your area of nonverbal behavior. I said, okay. And that guy was Paul Ekman. And I wrote to Paul Ekman in the summer. This was back in the day when there's no emails. You know, I actually typed a letter and sent it by post. And he replied. He said, when you come to my area, please let me know. And so I did, because he told me to. And so I said, okay. And then he said, okay, come to my laboratory. I said, okay. And I went there. He said, let's do a directed reading once a week. And he was not part of UC Berkeley faculty. So he was just doing this, you know, on his own, which I very much appreciate. And then that started a relationship with him and my work in facial expressions. So sorry for the long answer, but I had no idea I was going to study psychology. I had no idea what I was going to do. I went to Japan for a judo training, and here I did a cross-cultural study on nonverbal behavior. And I just happened to do that. And then I ended up with Ekman, and as I said, people tell me what to do. I just say, okay, and I do it. And I just did more and more and more and more with him, and there my career started.
Okay, the long answers are the best ones. So Thank you for that. You say that you studying psychology was an accident. That was the accident. So you went to judo training and then end up studying facial microexpressions with Dr. Paul Ekman.
Oh yeah, and when I went to college initially, I was not. Excuse me. I was not planning to be the psychologist. I had two majors, or I had two intended majors. One was pre-medicine, because I thought I want to be a medical doctor, and the other was music. So
that was unexpected.
Yeah. I mean, until this day, I love music. You know. Anyway, and when I was studying my first 2 years in college, university, I studied for pre-medicine, and I decided that I didn't want to be a physician. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And my friend happened to be a psychology major. He said, okay, why don't you take some classes? I said, okay. Because people tell me what to do, and I just do them.
Okay.
And it started.
Got it. Great. My second question. In your study, which is a great study called Spontaneous Facial Expressions of Emotion of Congenitally and Non-Congenitally Blind Individuals, we have a solid evidence in favor of the universality of certain emotional responses in certain contexts. So I would like to know, what other strong evidences or other studies can you point us that support the theory of the universality of emotions?
Oh my God. Okay.
Sorry for the long question.
Oh, no. This is a very great question, because the evidence I'm about to briefly describe is often ignored by those people who try to claim facial expressions of emotion are not universal. So I would just list them, okay? And we can talk about any one that you want. First of all, there's many studies, cross-cultural studies, demonstrating the cross-cultural recognition of facial expressions of emotion. Okay. There's many studies that demonstrate the cross-cultural production of the same facial expressions of emotion when an emotion has been reliably and validly elicited in the person and it's been ascertained in the study. Okay. There's studies of congenitally blind individuals, as you mentioned. There's studies of infants across cultures that demonstrate the same evolution of the facial musculature and the morphology of the expressions in different cultures. There's studies of kin versus non-kin, family versus non-family resemblances, and twin studies and raised apart and raised together identical and fraternal twins studies. So there's that evidence there. I'm probably forgetting some. There's evidence in other channels of nonverbal behavior like voice and gesture and whatnot that correspond with this. There's studies of the language of emotion that across languages and cultures that correspond with the basic emotions. There's studies of the antecedents of emotions that demonstrate that there's a universal psychological trigger of all of these basic emotions and their perceived psychological consequences. There's studies of the coherence of the responses with facial expressions. And then there's studies of non-human primates that demonstrate that the facial musculature for expressing emotions is the same among non-human primates and humans. And when non-human primates are placed in emotionally evocative situations, their facial expressions produce the same are the same as humans. Those, and I'm probably forgetting some, but those are the many domains that support this concept. It's not just studies of faces and especially judgments of faces, because I think one of your future questions is going to be, what about people who argue against it? Okay, I love to have arguments, not fighting, but critical thinking about our theories and our research. It's very good. And those arguments that try to claim that facial expressions of emotion are not universal or not biologically innate never take into account all of the evidence I just said. You will never find one article on that side that takes into account all of the evidence I just said and disputes all of them. The dispute is often about cross-cultural judgments of facial expressions of emotion. And I understand that depending upon how you ask people to judge a face, you can get very culturally different things. So for example, in Japan, there's an ideology, a cultural ideology, that when you see an angry face, you say, oh, that's fear, I'm afraid. The label is fear, but the face is angry. So I understand that people of different cultures can label faces differently, but that doesn't mean the label of the face is actually different. So I don't mean to get into all these nuances, but there's many domains of research, long domains with long histories, that all converge on the notion of universality of facial expressions of emotion.
Perfect. So, Lucas, do you want to?
Excellent. Well, David Matsumoto, I'm David too. It's a great start in research to have the same name. It's a great honor to have you here. I'm following your work for a long time. In my first studies, your book, Nonverbal Communication, Science and Application, it's a masterpiece of literature in nonverbal behavior research. Thanks a lot for this book, for all of us. I have two questions, and one it's about the deliberated facial expression. How you talk now? We have followed. One moment, please. We're reading my annotations. Okay. When we talk about posed deliberated expressions, as often we smile when we're greeting someone, or make expression of sadness when we're awake, and I believe that's among facial events, and between many facial events, there are the ones that occur in a greater quantity, I think. So what's the role of social deliberated posed facial expression in our relationships and in expression of emotion?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for a great question, which I've not asked very often. First of all, posed expressions are different than spontaneous expressions. They differ in certain different ways in terms of the facial configurations and the dynamics of how they occur. Part of the reason why is because spontaneous, immediate facial reactions are being activated by the lower part of our brain, which we don't have control of, and it just fires our emotion system. When we want to do anything that is posed, like picking up this cup or doing judo, something I have to learn, a different part of my brain has to drive that action. And because a different part of that brain drives that action, those different parts of the brain are more influenced by other things we've learned in our cultures. And for those reasons, when we pose something voluntarily, they look different and they also have different meanings. And so to your question, it's not that they're bad, because we need, humans need these posed expressions in everyday life in different cultures. So when I'm talking to my friend Anderson and he's telling me about a very sad story of his, I may look sad as I'm listening to that. I may or may not feel sad, but I can voluntarily show some empathy in that response. And so that would be a signal to my friend Anderson that I'm listening, I'm understanding. There's other expressions that we also posed that I call referential emotions, where I'm talking about something and that may be an emotional event, and I will have it on my face. So because the emotion on my face then references the emotion about the event. I may or may not be feeling it at that time. So these posed or more voluntary expressions of emotion, they're called simulated expressions, play a very important role in every culture and for keeping humans together. Now, and additionally, according as with your question, different cultures have different codes for them, and how you would do that. So I think if I was in Brazil, I would have a certain code about how to pose my expressions, which is different than when I'm in Japan, and it's different when I'm in France or Spain or the United States. And so those codes may be a little different, but the function is the same in all the cultures.
Excellent. So we can understand the deliberated facial expressions like linguistic code generated by culture. It's a right understanding.
I don't know if I would call it linguistic, but certainly as a cultural code like linguistics, I understand them like that. Yeah, you're right. Because linguistics are specifically about the use of language, right? But in a similar fashion, we have cultural codes about expressive behavior as well.
Excellent. That question was talked about by Merabian. It's matemas. If you, I don't know the word in English, but it's a cinema. It's a synesic code. So it's a old question. Well, my question too is about nonverbal behavior and application. So we see more and more uses of facial expression, analysis of emotion, and body language being used in most diverse segments, especially public security. In Brazil, we have many students of national public security, many of them very interesting in that field. It's particularly difficult to find fields in this area of security due to many ethical issues involved and complications to carry out experiment. Obtaining a ground truth in that field, it's a very difficult. How useful do you think this knowledge is for public security professionals who will need to apply in a real time rather than watching a video in a lab? How this professional can use that knowledge in your day-by-day activities in security, in public security?
Well, this is also a very interesting question and extremely important. And as you know, I spend a lot of my time in this area? So the direct answer is the use of reading body language and nonverbal behavior, including faces and microexpressions, can be extremely useful in the security fields, provided that security professionals learn validated indicators of mental states. And I say that because there are certain behavioral indicators that have been validated in science to be signals of certain mental states, like the facial expressions of emotion. There are many behaviors that do not have that kind of validation. And I have seen, and there is actually much research that reviews training of security professionals, but they've been when they're trained on unvalidated indicators or non-validated indicators, they don't do well in applying that skill. However, if security professionals are trained on validated indicators and trained on how to use them, how to think about what you're observing, then it's very useful. There's no question about it. So if one looks at the research on the use of body language in security areas like detecting deception or whatever that is, actually the research is very equivocal. You don't get a good picture. That's because a lot of the research uses unvalidated or non-validated indicators. If you focus the studies on indicators that are security professionals being trained on validated indicators, it's very clear, it's very useful. And that's the difference, and that's how one approaches this question. In fact, there's many discourses and debates today here in the United States and to some degree elsewhere about the role of body language in interviewing and interrogation and threat assessment. Much of it is based on reviews of the literature that use unvalidated or non-validated indicators. And I agree with them, but they're not useful. However, but I don't believe that they say, thus, nothing of body language is useful. That's an incorrect interpretation. And I think if we're going to have, and not you and me, but if me and other people have academic debates, who cares? Seriously, if people will use this in their lives for security professionals or for something that matters, then I care. I want to get it right. And that's where I say, no, you just don't say all or nothing. Find out what works and why. Anyway, I'm starting to get very passionate about this. So, but that's my answer to that question.
I think your answer is perfect because you reached to the point where we first met here and where we first think to invite you to talk with us, because there is a very huge criticize that is coming from person, and most of those person are involved in some areas of science studies, but out of psychology and behavior. For example, some person that involved in mathematics and physics and are trying to disbelieve some or most of the studies that are involved in nonverbal behavior. And what I see is much of this happens because there are a lot of junky science that is promoted by person that did not study correctly, as you said, the valid indicators, or sometimes mix everything together in a bowl like NLP and other things like cues to deception. If a person cross the arms, they are not listening to you. If you scratch the nose, they are lying, and so on. And what is happening is that this person are taking these events and say, whoa, look at this study. This is what it is saying is micro expressions are not indicators that the person is lying. So nonverbal is junky. Nothing of this works.
Right.
I think this is the situation that we are seeing today. Did you see this kind of criticisms happen in United States or other countries?
I have been living with that criticism for about 40 years of my academic life. And it continues till this day. It's the same issue. And it's exactly the same process as you say, Anderson. People are very often willing to cherry pick certain thoughts or research and don't look further. And when they're not a specialist, okay, I understand that. But there are specialists who do this as well, researchers in our field who do that well. I'm very happy. I will happy to sit anywhere and talk with anybody about this research area, because if there's somebody who says to me, "Oh, this doesn't work," I guarantee you, they don't talk about the research, the literature as a whole, or they don't look at certain studies, or they interpret the findings of certain studies certain ways. So let me give you an example. There's one researcher who's very well known here and around the world who says, facial expressions are not universal. They're not innate, blah, blah, blah. Look at these studies of spontaneous judo athletes. Matsumoto did this study of spontaneous judo athletes and the blind. We tried to replicate his study, but we didn't find it. And thus, it doesn't happen. Okay, that's great. I looked at that person's study. That person's study examines expressions of judo athletes in the preparation rounds, not at the end. Not at the end. And as I said previously when I did that research, one has to examine the reactions when it's done, because then it's done, and then people have a reaction. But you can study, especially at the Olympics. You know, I'm very fortunate because I've been to 4 Olympic Games as a coach. And I know when you're in the round 1, nobody is throwing a party, right? Nobody is throwing a party. If you're at the Olympics, first of all, you're the top 24 in the world, and you expect to go all the way. And you win round 1, round 2, round 3, you're not having no parties until it's at the end. So I'm saying, and I saw people write like that, and these are specialists in the area. And so I'm always happy to sit and talk and look plainly at the research that exists, and not, people can have their own different opinions, but I'm willing to have other people decide. No problem at all.
Very good, David, very good. And I have a question that comes to the point of what we are talking about, because several researchers, including famous names such as Lisa Feldman, for example, are incisive in stating that there is no facial expression of universal emotion, and also that the face does not have the power to demonstrate the emotion experienced by the person. And it goes further, because in some articles we see a claiming that there is no evidence that in fact there is any kind of emotional neural circuit. What is your point of view on this specific kind of criticism?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that Professor Feldman Barrett is an amazing scholar. No question about it. However,
sure,
she is wrong. And basically it is. I can point to anything that when she points to something as evidence about something, I can also look at, I'm very happy, and I have, look at the same thing and just say that her interpretations are incorrect. There's nothing wrong with the research that exists. The research bodies are all giving us data, but her interpretations of the research, I believe, are just incorrect. So for example, in one of her latest writings, she's actually wrote about my study, the blind study, and pointed to another person's blind study and said, aha, you see, it doesn't happen there. I went to read that study. Oh, blind people all produce the spontaneous expressions of emotion correctly, like everybody else, but they do not produce the posed ones. I'm okay with that, but she pointed to that as evidence against my study, which is crazy because that study she pointed to actually claims the same thing as mine. She actually pointed to two or three other studies that use judo athletes. One of them I just described to you. Another one that said there's no spontaneous emotions in judo athletes at the Olympic Games. Okay, I went to look at that study. That study examined judo athletes at the medal ceremonies on the podium. Okay, they're different. I agree, because I already said that in 2006. Those are not spontaneous reactions to winning and losing. However, she pointed to that as evidence against mine. The problem is very few people go back and look at those other articles and make their own decisions. People are willing to just take what someone claims and believe it as on faith. For my suggestion to you and your audience, don't believe me. Go back and read for yourself. I believe you will come to my position. But that's the problem. I think the problem, especially when there's people, for example, in the security world, who are in charge of just believe people, read and make your own decisions, and be a critical thinker. So anyway, there's no question that she and others, many of her colleagues, are excellent scholars. But I'm sorry, I disagree strongly with her interpretations. She does have a large microphone, and she uses that microphone. Okay. But you know what many people don't know? Several years ago, there was a survey of emotion researchers and asked emotion researchers around the world. Okay, there's been these huge debates about universality of facial expressions. Do you believe in universality of facial expressions and basic emotions or not? 70% of the emotion researchers in the world said, yes, I agree. However, the ones that disagree have the largest microphone. So this is kind of the way it is.
This is very interesting because as we think about, most of the research goes under the microphone because nobody is listening to them.
Of course.
And if we spend a day on ResearchGate or another repository and look for some research that being made, has recently published, we find a lot of very interesting studies.
Sure.
And I don't know if my colleagues agree with me and you, Dave, but what I see in those publications, that most of them have strong criticism about facial expression, microexpression, and we came with facts references. And look at this angry facial expression. What is an angry facial expression? Oh, they're action unit 4, 7, 23, 24, blah, blah, blah. But what I see is that when you come and talk about spontaneous expression, micro expressions, there's not a single specific codification that you can use all the time, any situation, because our face are not just made to express micro expression, is also used to, as you said, to agree with people, to get empathetics. And most of our facial movements will not be taken in consideration in all this research. And they say, look at this person that's saying they're feeling angry. Oh, look at this Ekman, Matsumoto, and all this stuff that see the angry faces must have these action units. Aha, they don't fit. So there is no universal angry facial expression. Do you agree with this point of view?
Oh, absolutely. And my response is always, okay, you say there's no study. Not you, I mean those people, right? Okay, and having different views is okay. However, I challenge anybody to show me when there's a situation when an emotion, a strong emotion, is elicited in somebody, and we know it's strong. We know it's strong. There's no question that it was elicited in that person. and there's no reason to hide it, or they just elicited it. And then the facial expression does not occur. Show me that study. It never exists. Show me a blind individual who's placed in a situation whose facial muscles can move, because some individuals cannot move their muscles, but whose facial muscles can move, and you elicit a strong emotion in them, their faces are going to move the same. Show me the study that elicits the emotion and the face does not happen. You will not find that. And by the way, I don't need, most people out there don't need that study. All we have to do is turn on the news and watch what's happening in Ukraine. Or in the United States, we have tragedies every day, tragedies all around the world, and great things that happen all around the world. Why do people all around the world do those same things? Why? It cannot be that we all learn to do the very specific facial muscle movements in exactly the same ways when we were children. It just cannot be. And so, yes, I agree. I agree with that very much.
Excellent. We have a thought about facial expression and cultural expression. David, Dr. Matsumoto, it's one of researchers. We talk about biopsychosocial factors of emotion. In neuroscience, in many times the researchers used to biopsycho, and the social is put in by side. In many times the persons thought it's one thing or another thing. We can have both. We can have a cultural expression of emotion because we have a same core of biological basis of behavior, but many emotions have your experience, your genesis, your locus in cultural, because we have many hundreds emotional states, and only, that's my question, only 7 we can spot, we can distinguish in the face. But 7, it's a problematic number of facial expression because the content. I would like to ask what you think about the inclusion of contempt in the group of primary expression, because we know we can find parallels in other primates and other things. Well, what do you think about this emotion? Well, as a primary emotion.
Yeah. So first of all, your question touched on many interesting and different things. So let me first, before I get to that question, you raised a very interesting point about how scientists and others interpret research as it's this or this, A or B, in or out, all or none. That's a problem with scientific philosophy. It's a problem with the thinking of scientists. We have to think, how can all these findings be correct? How can we understand them to be correct? Because I believe in Professor Feldman Barrett's and others' research data. I don't agree with the interpretations of the data, but I agree with the data. So how do I understand that kind of data in relation to my data? And in a nutshell, I think it has to do with what types of whether emotions are actually elicited or not, right? And what is the output variable that we're examining? If it's immediate reactions, I'm sure they're universal. If it's reactions a second later, now we have cultural differences. If we're talking about people talking about their emotions, now we're talking about something that went from an unconscious process to a conscious verbalization, which is heavily influenced by culture. And so I don't think verbal representations of emotions are the same as immediate reactions of they're just different. But people study one or study other and argue against the other one. And that, I think, is not a constructive approach, because we've been doing that for 50 years or more and just pointing at each other. We got to get away from pointing at each other. So that's what I think about that. With regard to contempt, clearly the research basis, the empirical basis for the other 6 is much stronger, much stronger. I happen to include contempt because I believe the data for its universal production and recognition is strong. It's clearly not as strong as the others. So I'm willing to change my mind in the future if I see that when people are feeling contempt or that family of emotions, that they produce something else or they don't produce that expression. I'm okay with that. So I'm okay with it being less strong than the other 6. However, let me also say, here's another thing that people say, right? The face only shows 6 or 7 emotions. That's crazy because humans have more. Yeah, there's no question. If I understand the reason why we have these expressions in the face, because of their evolutionary signal value. And these are the expressions that are important for us when we can see each other relatively clearly. It's not, and that's one of the reasons why, for example, there are other universal emotions, expressions like pride and triumph, perhaps embarrassment, some shame, that is not necessary to see the face close up. And so the repertoire of universal emotions goes beyond the face. There's no question about that. And it's related to how close I need to be to somebody. So for example, as you know, fear is a universal expression. However, most judgment studies of fear expressions show that the judgment accuracy rates of fear are much lower than happy or anger or sadness or anything. I get it, because fear as a universal signal, I want to see it not only in the face, but when I'm at a distance, when I see my friend running away from a lion, okay, I don't need to see their face. I understand what's going on. So so we have to root, for me, I want to root my understanding in the evolutionary signal value of all of these things. So related to contempt, what's the evolutionary signal value, right? I think you're right in that it may be not at the same plane as the other emotions. However, contempt requires a little bit more consciousness of self. No question. Where does that happen? Because it's clear that non-human primates also have self and consciousness of self. And so do they produce contempt? Probably not, because they don't have the musculature around here. But it may be the possibility that contempt is a relatively recent emergent emotion, just as the other 6 are, because before non-human primates, you don't see those 6, right? You see smaller groupings of these emotions lower on the phylogenetic line. And so when we get to the non-human primates, we may see 5 or 6, but when we get to humans, we see it maybe another 1 or 2. I think it may be something like that. And so that's how so for me, for human emotions, in terms of expressions, I put that in as one of the universal expressions. But clearly it's different.
Okay. Anderson, do you have another question? Or
yes, for sure. David, do you are okay with time?
Yeah,
we have more minutes,
few
minutes. Okay. I would like to talk about your publication in the 2019 in Frontiers of Psychology. Okay. There is the micro-expression differentiate truth from lies about future malicious intent. Okay. I would like you to talk about this research and what did you access it?
So, before I explain, let me just say that that's one of the studies that no one points to and says, when people say micro expressions, they don't work, no one talks about that study.
Exactly. It's because this I choose it.
It's a convenient lack of memory, you know? And the reason why we did that study, there's multiple reasons. One of which, I've heard that for so long, that micro expressions don't do blah, 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 blah. And in a strict sense, people who claim that there's no published studies about that are correct in a strict sense. Even though when we work in the security area, I see it all the time. But in the strict sense, with academic publishing, they're correct. And in fact, Paul Ekman claimed that for 40 years, but never published an article on that. He published books and chapters, but it's easier to publish a book or chapter than a peer-reviewed article. And in fact, the first peer-reviewed article that he published about microexpressions was Recognizing Microexpressions, and I was the first author in 2000. And so critics of that claim that microexpressions can differentiate truth from lies were correct in saying that. First of all, I wanted to fix that problem. And secondly, that research was evolved or emerged from a request from a government agency for us to do that study. And so I did that study with at a checkpoint scenario, and we decided to measure microexpressions. Here's the other thing. If you look at actual studies of microexpressions, people point to 2006 Porter and Ten Brink and say, aha, microexpressions were measured there, but they didn't differentiate truth and lies. They're correct. But again, let's look at the detail. Porter and Ten Brink measured microexpressions as occurring 1/25th of a second. Why? Because Ekman always claimed that microexpressions occur as fast as 1/25th of a second. I have always had a problem with this because, as you know, video is 30 frames a second. Film, back in the day when I started in this field, was 24 frames a second. So how somebody can make a claim about 1/25th of a second, that was a little strange to me. However, there were studies where some video were taken at 50 frames a second, okay, where one could possibly see something in 2 frames and make a claim, but no one ever published that. So I always had a question about why the 1/25th. So Porter and Ten Brink did that study in 2006, measuring expressions at 1/25th of a second, and in their article they say, aha, it did not occur very often, and when they occurred, they didn't differentiate truth and lies. And because I'm in this world, I said, oh, well, that's a problem with the definition. So in this 2018 study, or 19, I forget, we actually measured microexpressions. We measured them, and we, in our analysis, identified anything that's below 0.2, anything that's below 0.3 seconds, 0.4 seconds, 0.5 seconds, and then above. And what we found was, yes, at 1/25th of a second or anything under 0.2, they don't occur very often. Microexpressions start to occur more frequently at 0.3 of a second. And at 0.3 or 0.4 of a second, as you can see in the article, they're very differentiating truth and lies. So one of the important parts of that article is that we actually measured different times and tested different times and demonstrated that, aha, this is the reason why previous studies did not get it, because microexpressions are normally occurring after 0.3 or so. When you examine them like that, they differentiate truth and lies. And I think that article has a graph that compares baseline to the lie questions, where the microexpressions goes up and where truth tellers go down. And that's one of the few studies actually that examine nonverbal behavior to a baseline. So there's several unique characteristics of that. So that's the important thing about that study. When I look at previous studies of Porter and Ten Brink, they did have some studies of microexpressions that had a little bit more, less strict criteria, under 0.5 a second. And those 2 studies that they did that actually did differentiate truth from lies. So the only research that examines microexpressions above 0.3 of a second and below 0.5 of a second, they have always differentiated truth from lies. Of course, Anderson, as you know, nobody likes to go into that detail. I'm happy to go into that detail with anybody who's interested. But that's how I understand that article and the contribution of that article.
I think most of people like to read the headlines.
Yes.
They're headlines reader.
Yes. No question. No question.
Just to go to the end of our talk, I would like to talk about in your perspective, what would be the main area involved in the study of facial expression of emotion that needs further investigation in further research? What do you think is the future of this research area?
Well, first of all, I don't think there is a future. I think there's multiple futures. But one major thing about a future research agenda needs to deal with the questions that we're dealing with. Because most studies examine expressions in a slice in time. If we can examine expressions across, when we know that there's an emotional reaction, and we study that across time, we will see an expression unfold in different ways. We've done some of the one of the few studies about that based on our Olympic study that was published in 2009 or something. But there are very few studies that watch an expression unfold from an immediate universal reaction to one that is very culturally different. So how that unfolds, where that crosses consciousness, and what the unfolding is related to with regard to our other physiology, our other expressive behavior, our vocabulary about emotion, that package across time is something researchers should, I hope future research could take to tackle. I think it's a very difficult problem. And I think, like you said, Anderson, consumers love headlines, researchers love fast and easy. And I think the fast and easy also is detrimental to our understanding of human nature, expression, and emotion, because they are more complex than quick slices in time. So I think that's a big issue. I think there are many other research questions, but I hope one day that the field kind of engages with that difficult question.
Great. So I guess we're going to the end of our talk, right, guys? So
Yes.
I want to thank you again, Dr. Matsumoto. David, thank you for your time. It was a great time. I don't know about my friends, so I want to thank you again. So
it is my honor and my privilege to have been with you. I'm amazed at the level of your questions, because as you know, I am very fortunate to talk with many people about research, and many discussions are very superficial. Yours was not. And it shows the level and the depth of your thinking, as well as your audience, and in the work that you do. And I'm honored that we are affiliated with each other. I'm always happy to come and do something and help out in whatever way I can. Always happy to sit and have a discussion or about research. I only ask that the next time we do this, we do it in Rio or Sao Paulo, and afterwards we have some feijoada. Must have some feijoada. But the good feijoada.
Oh,
Yes.
please.
I haven't had a good feijoada for a little. However, a little personal thing. My son dates a woman from Brazil right now, and so their family makes me feijoada. It's the best thing in the world. So
Feijoada with caipirinha.
yes. So one day some feijoada, some picanha, and then we're good.
oh, great.
For sure, we will take these conversations again, but in a much more interesting place with good food and in good weather.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you so much again, David. It was amazing being here with you, talking about your research. There is, with any doubt, inspired. Willing to see you again in a near future.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Professor, it's a great honor. One thing is you read a word written by a people. Other thing is it's to talk with the people who write the words. I remember a quote of my academic advisor Gabriel Mograbi that says, I don't care about the departmental fences that separated knowledge. I want to seek the truth. I believe you are one of the greatest examples of this practice, a truly true seeker. It's a great honor to talk with you, David. I'm very happy with this talk.
Obrigado. Muito obrigado.
Bom, pessoal, vocês viram aí a entrevista na íntegra, tá certo? Eu espero que vocês tirem as próprias conclusões com base nesse vídeo, com base nessa entrevista. Lembro também de pedir para vocês enviarem essa entrevista do Matsumoto para os nossos amigos criticozinhos, para que eles possam responder isso aí também, para ver que afinal de contas a preocupação deles não é só com o hype, mas sim com a ciência, não é mesmo? E para você que quer ver muito mais sobre esse debate, quer ver outros vídeos com outros grandes especialistas também nessa área, eu te convido agora mesmo a assistir a nossa playlist científica aqui no canal Metaforando, uma playlist mais séria, mais densa, revisando artigos científicos, comentando notícias, enfim, vai lá que você vai gostar muito. Não deixe também de se inscrever aqui no canal Metaforando, caso você ainda não seja inscrito. Curte esse vídeo aqui também e compartilha com quem você acha que precisa saber mais sobre esse assunto. Um abraço e te vejo no próximo vídeo. Valeu!